Hi everyone, this is Mr. Barth, and this is the video of me going over the first PowerPoint for the Great Depression. This video is going to be talking about the long-term causes of the Great Depression, and it'll set up what led to the stock market crash and the Depression itself. So I always start my PowerPoints with an essential question. In this case, the EQ is, what were the long-term causes of the Great Depression? Now, one thing to note about my PowerPoints, it might look a little different than others, other classes you might have, is what I try to do is highlight the things that I think are most important for you to know. And so you don't actually see it on this slide, but what I'll do is if there's something that I want you to write down in your notebook or on a Google slide or a Google Doc, I will highlight some phrase or terms or a bullet point in like a different color or some way that you know that that's important. So in this slideshow, any words that are written in red, I want you to write down in your notes. So like in this slide, you don't have to write anything down. I know some students might want to, and it could be beneficial for them, but you're not required to. So this slide basically starts off by talking about the decade of the 1920s, which is actually the last time that we taught about in your previous quarter in U.S. history. And we talked about how there was a lot of changes going on in the 1920s, like people moving to the big city. We have a lot of racial conflict with things like the Chicago riots and the Tulsa massacre. We have issues like the Scopes monkey trial. We have prohibition. Okay, lots of things are changing in the 1920s. But overall, the 1920s is usually seen as a pretty positive decade because of how well people in the middle class are doing. Most people seem to be making more money and have jobs. Unemployment is really low at this point. And so it seems like things are going well. However, what we're going to talk about today is how there's actually some major problems facing Americans that are kind of under the surface and not really noticed at first. And we can see one way that things are kind of going well in America through this graph. This graph tells us how good products are being made by factories and companies. When this line goes up, that means companies are doing well, which means that they can sell their products, they can hire new workers, they can give raises, things are going good in businesses. When the line goes down, that means that businesses aren't making as much stuff anymore. They might have to fire or lay off some of their workers. So we want this line to continuously go up. And in the 1920s, during this time period of this PowerPoint, businesses are doing pretty well. So what's the problem? What is going to cause this major financial or money problem called the Great Depression? What's going to lead to this? Because everything so far seems to say that things are good. Well, we're going to look at 4 long-term causes of the Great Depression. Okay, and here's what you can see is in red, so you need to make sure you write this down. The first is industrial problems. And really, when we're talking about industries, we're meaning like factories or companies that make something or produce something. And companies that make things like clothing and steel, cars, they begin to make a lot of stuff. And making a lot of stuff can be good, but when you make too much of something, that means it's not very special anymore. It's not very scarce, which means the value of it goes down. If there's a lot of something, it's not very valuable. If something is hard to get, it's very expensive. It's very valuable. If you could find diamonds just by digging in your backyard any day of the week, diamonds wouldn't be very special. They wouldn't be engagement rings on engagement rings. But because they're very scarce and hard to get, that's why they're expensive. So businesses are having problems where they're not making, or they're making too much stuff, and factories are having trouble. And so in some cases, they're not able to pay their workers more money. In some cases, they might actually have to lay off some workers. So that's our first one, industrial problems. Next is the distribution of wealth. Okay, so distribution means how something is being given out, and wealth is money and land. So how much is, or who is getting the money in this time? Well, much like many other times in American history, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. See, prices keep rising. And for people who are working in these factories that aren't doing very well, their wages are staying the same. Wages are how much money you get paid at your job, and many people's wages are staying the same. But prices start to go up. And if your wages are staying the same, but your rent is getting higher, or the price of milk is going up, that gets really difficult to pay for all the stuff that you want to buy. And so that means you have the choice to make. Either you buy less, or you come up with another way to get the stuff you want without spending money. And we'll talk about what that looks like tomorrow. The third issue is agricultural problems. So the biggest industry that suffered during the 1920s was agriculture, farming. Farmers have been growing a lot over the last decade or so, last 10 years before this, especially during World War I, when we need a lot of food to pay or to feed all of the soldiers. But after the war ended, we didn't need as much food anymore. But farmers had been making so much money off the food they produced, they didn't want to lower how much food they made. So they're making all this food, but not as much people want to buy it. And so many farmers are going to basically lose a lot of money. Prices go down of their food, they make even less money. Many farmers lose their homes, they lose their farms. So farmers are having major problems. And the last is government policies. In the 1920s, the government basically wants businesses to do whatever they want. They don't want to create regulations or rules for businesses, because that means, or they argue that by creating rules for businesses, it hurts their growth and they won't be able to grow anymore. However, when businesses don't have any rules, they oftentimes will take advantage of that situation to make more money, even if that means possibly hurting people or consumers or stockholders. The government is also going to lower their taxes on the businesses and the wealthy, so the government itself is getting less money from businesses and the rich. That's where this video is going to end for now. So we have 4 long-term causes of the Great Depression: industrial problems, distribution of wealth, and agricultural problems, and government policies. Make sure you know these long-term causes. They're going to be useful for our assessment in this unit. If you have any questions, please just let me know. Thank you.